Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on the KIS Organics YouTube channel and right here on Chad Westport YouTube channel for another episode of the Organic Q&A. I'm excited. We've got some good questions today, but as always, put your questions into the chat because you guys drive the show. Tad and myself are here to make our best effort to answer your questions. And, you know, one of us is usually on point. So, how you doing today, Tad?
Good. I just had to figure out how to get logged in, but I think I'm ready to go and excited for all the questions. Yeah. Dude, you have
Awesome.
you have the best crew that shows up for these. It's so much fun.
A lot of people are really into kind of trying to grow in a better way. You know, we always say a healthier way, even though it's interesting to like quantitate that into the cannabis. We think about that with food, but a lot of the things that we talk about here, they're, you know, it's universal. Soil health, soil biology, nutrients, they all relate. So whether you're growing carrots or cannabis, it's a good show for people. So I'm glad they show up. And I see, geez, we will get just firing on the questions already. I see some good ones coming in. I kind of had a few, you know, we always say, you know, if we're not able to get to it during the show, or maybe you think of it later, go to YouTube, type it in our comment section on the show. We look at those and we bring them up in future episodes. And here are a couple of them. And this was, you know, kind of a question because pHing in living soil is a conversation in itself. But this person, you know, just kind of has a question. And we've kind of touched on it, but I'll just read it anyways. If a person has a water filter, or essentially out of the tap, their input water is 5.3 or no higher. Can a living soil like the KIS Organics, like the biochar soil, or some of maybe the build-a-soil stuff, basically organic living soil, they're different, but let's just lump them together here. Can they take that, you know, 5.3 and buffer it to an appropriate zone? Yeah, I'll leave it there and then I'll dissect it a little bit more.
Okay. Short answer is yes. They absolutely can buffer. You have a lot more buffering capacity in what we call living soil than what you would get in, say, a straight hydroponic setup. All that being said, it's a little more complicated and nuanced to that, because this is why people get away with saying pH doesn't matter, is because they say your soil will buffer it or it won't affect your soil pH. It is more complicated. So the real thing to look at there is what your alkalinity of your water is. So how hard is it to move that water from a pH of 5.3 to a pH of 6.3, let's just say, for example. And remember, pH is logarithmic. So
yes.
And what creates that is the amount of minerals already attached to the water molecules. So what I like to look at is that alkalinity, and if that soil is hard to move, meaning that water has higher ppms, then potentially whatever those ppms are that it's bringing in this case it looks like anions because it's a lower pH. Maybe it's bringing in phosphates, for example. Is it bringing in so many of those phosphates that's going to impact fertility over time? Is it going to lower the pH in my media over time? It depends. So getting an irrigation suitability test from your local university extension, we use Logan. I think they're like $30. They're not $25, $30. They're not expensive. We'll give you a ton of really good information about the quality of your water. And I've seen water with just about everything in it. The ones you want to avoid is sodium and chlorides. Those are the two worst common things that you see. But even if you have excess calcium or magnesium or iron, or I've seen water with radioactive elements. I think it was uranium in one in Oklahoma. So you would be shocked what can get into your water system depending on how you're getting it, and also how your water, if you're on well water, how it can change throughout the season. So sometimes water that looks good, you know, in the spring or in the winter when there's a lot more in the aquifer can change, and in the summer when things are drier, it's going to concentrate everything. that water might not be as good then. So water's complicated. I am not a water expert. We have a water blog post that talks about this on our page in a little more depth. And then if you really need to dive into water, Dram is the company to talk to. They are the water experts. We're actually going to have them coming out to the conference that we're throwing in Bozeman in September to speak. And so that's who I turn to when I get a water question that I can't answer or a really complicated, facility thing.
Cool. And then this is the website that he's referencing for anybody listening in.
Oh, thank you.
I do want to get to the Bozeman thing later. I was going to start off with that because I'm curious, but we've already got a bunch of good questions. So we'll jump to the questions and come back to that one. Yeah. Thank you for that answer. Yes, it does work. There's nuances to it because, again, there's pH in the rhizosphere and then there's just pH out in the soil. There's a lot of things. Okay, we'll move past that one. So
I will add, like here in Western Washington, like we're really lucky. Like you and I mean, I don't know about you, but at least for me, like growing up in like Kirkland, Seattle, Bellevue, our water supply was very clean. I could water straight out of the tap and not have any issues. I mean, I could remove the chlorine if I wanted to, and we could talk about chlorine too and chloramines. But in general, here in Western Washington, we have great water, and so I don't even have to worry about it really. But there are places in the country like Oklahoma where you can have water quality that's a lot poorer. So I want to mention that.
We have been super lucky. Again, the ppm and the pH of the water just out of the tap is almost perfect. But you did mention wells, and I think that's an important difference because of all the crazy like ECs and all of the crazy pHs I've heard from like people they have to start with, it's always been wells. So yeah, the fluctuation, the inconsistency, that's an important thing if a person is on well water. So because again, they change tanks in my area, or they change the aquifer every like once or twice a year. So there is a slight adjustment, but I can be lazy and not check it for a month and it's still kind of the same. So
yeah, I know we have a lot of questions, but I think water is so important. And I think about this is a little bit of a soapbox moment for me, but like I went and got a special water filter for our refrigerator because that's where we get most of our water, because I think about the water that I drink and I know that there's microplastics and PFAS, those forever chemicals getting into our water supplies right now, and they're just starting to look at them. With some of these changes in administration that we're seeing politically, and I'm not trying to get political, I'm just saying we're going to have probably less regulation. And so it's a good idea to consider, at least for your drinking water, looking into filters that do filter that sort of thing. I went with a company called HydroV, but there's research on which filters are a little bit cleaner or not. And for me, that was a really worthwhile investment. And then when we think about our plants can take up these elements. We know that there's research to show that plants can take up microplastics from the soil. There's research to show that some of these chemicals are making it into the plant tissue itself. And if you think about how much water a plant consumes versus how much water you consume, relatively speaking, this is why heavy metals comes into the play, because in your bed or in your pot, your plant is going to see gallons and gallons and gallons of water through it, and that's going to accumulate over time. Whereas you drinking a pint of that same water may be totally safe by EPA standards, just because of the vast difference in volume of water between your plant and you, and cannabis being a hyper accumulator. It's something to think about.
Absolutely is. I mentioned it before, but I just got another notice from the Water Commission here that we've tested higher of the parts per billion for arsenic. And I think if I read the letter correct, they have to report it for 3 quarters until it totally goes away, even if they've corrected it within those quarters. And it has gone back down below the acceptable minimum, but it's still high considering. So yeah, arsenic, I mean, that would be something that would accumulate in the plant. That's always a concern, particularly on the commercial scale. And the commercial people are the ones who are using the most water. So that's a double whammy there. But Tie Sticks, always good to see him. He had a question. He said these have been popping up for a while. And I know there's different brands out there, but just kind of like in general, do you trust those RV water filters?
Man, That's such a great question, and I don't have a perfect answer. I went with a brand that had more reviews on Amazon when I bought mine that
Okay.
looked to be good. It's basically activated carbon in these filters. In theory,
Hmm.
if they are what they say they are, they should do some basic levels of filtration for us, at least to remove chlorine and chloramines. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I always, if I were for like my drinking water in general, I try the majority of it. I tried to go with companies that had third party testing to show that they had been tested for whatever I was trying to remove. But yeah, I just hooked an inline RV filter for my water for my Blue Mat system, just as a way to give a little bit better filtration on it.
Excellent. I had we had, like most people, we had this the generic Brita before, but then when we learned about that, one of our friends in the city council here recommended a better water filter, something that focuses more on heavy metals to us, and so we've recently bought that. But admittedly, I don't use that water for my plants. I just take it from the tap for the plants. I let it sit out. Another conversation, but yeah, so good idea. I like the topic of water because, again, it's essential. And we do have kind of a couple more questions that relate to that. Justin Selvey here. And I don't know if you've ever tried a large soil mass on a system like an Autopot or, where it's bottom fed watering. And he was curious if, a 35-liter Autopot would be okay for living soil. My immediate thought or concern would be like, how is that water underneath going to reach the upper layer? I
Mhm.
know there's capillary action, but is it enough to sustain proper moisture levels up above, or do you still need to hand water every now and then?
So yes, this works. I mean, people have proven that, so I'm not here to say it doesn't work. I do like occasional top waterings to flush oxygen gases down, oxygen stuff down into the soil
Okay.
profile.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, you're right. It's a matter of capillary action overcoming gravity to bring that water up. And it does work. I tend to prefer top watering once, if you're comfortable with watering your plants. Some people just are not comfortable with learning how to water. They haven't really spent a lot of time on that, but I think it's an important skill. Um,
Oh
but yeah,
gosh, yeah.
living soil, I guess short answer, yes, you can absolutely do autopots. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great option for people. But I do like top watering, and especially right after transplant, before those roots get established, I think you should top water just to make sure your plant's getting sufficient water until those roots can access the media better.
Absolutely, and I'm a person who does use Autopots. I do turn them off because I do dry amendments, so I water those in. So it's kind of a little bit of both when I am using my Autopots. But that's a good question because that is a again popular method a lot of people are using these days. Kind of applies to SIPs as well. But in the realm of water, let's see, Wreck-It Ralphie had a question too that he had put in the comment section. He says, what is the coconut water powder application rate that you recommend? And is there a risk of burning the plants if you go overboard on something with coconut, the
Um,
powder?
I don't remember the rates off the top of my head. Brandon,
Okay,
who's in the chat section, may be able to look that up or get back to you. He can also tackle
perfect.
future other water questions in the comment section for me. Um, what the concern I would have with water powder or coconut powder and water for your plants is that maybe you have too many enzymes coming in, or yeah, maybe amino acids, but really I think the risk is relatively low. But possibly with the amount of enzymes coming in, you could get maybe some hormonal twisting of leaves or things like that that may
Okay.
be detrimental in high doses. But it's a pretty safe amendment to use. I don't typically recommend it a lot, but I understand that some people have had good success with it. So,
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Again, there's pretty much anything under the sun can almost be used as a nutrient if you ferment it. It's all kind of like
Mm.
knowing about what and how and ratios. And that was a question here from, Justin. He says, I made a dozen different ferments from locally harvested ingredients and would love to have a rough idea of what I got and what specifically they can be used for. So, I guess the first question, is there a general database or resource we can look to get some of these answers?
Yeah, I know there are people that have compiled databases on this to give you a better idea, but there's going to be inherent variability, and that's not that this is bad. So like I highly encourage people to experiment, make ferments. It's definitely the cheapest way to most affordable way to feed your plants, and I totally support that. If I was on in Hawaii or somewhere where I had limited access to resources or
Hmm.
resources were very expensive, this is a phenomenally good option. For me, because I have access to organic amendments that are relative to the crop I'm growing very inexpensive. I don't experiment with these as much because of that inherent variability. I mean, if you think about it, the fruit that you're fermenting, for example, can have different mineral content based on how it was grown. And then that content is concentrated. We have seen issues with high chlorides in some of these ferments. And so it can be bringing in things that you maybe don't want as much of too. Um, but the only way to know what's in it is to test it. And frankly, I don't really want to suggest that because it gets so expensive. I mean, the whole point of making it is that you're saving money by not buying things that are already, tested. So, um, yeah, I don't have a great answer there. You're gonna have to experiment with it, honestly, and see how your plants respond. And then if they respond positively, you want to look and try and figure out what created that response from your ferment and try and narrow it down to a particular mineral or some aspect of biology or something in your ferment. That would be my best approach
Yeah,
on it. But
for me, that's kind of been one of my biggest hangups with that approach. Is, as you mentioned, I do have the availability of other alternatives that other people have done the R&D with, and they are affordable. But that aside, I like numbers. I want to know, how much should I put in? Like, what is the strength? And that's one thing that with the equipment that we all have is hard to extrapolate from a solution. So there are databases, and I will try to Google it and look it up here. I know Potaponics was working on one. Um, and it
yeah,
was it was basically like crowdsourced, which can introduce error, but that's the closest thing that I could think of aside from, general books like Horsetail Silica, right? We know it has it, but we don't necessarily know how much, or is there
yeah.
an easy way to quantify that?
Yeah, I see ones too, even with things like fish meal, feather meal, bone meal that will list, NPK. And even those are not all that accurate. So when we talk about taking something now that we grew ourselves and or bought at the grocery store and then fermenting that, yeah, they're going to be even more inconsistent potentially. So you may have much more nutrients in there or much less than you initially thought. And I know Bryant Mason, soil doctor, did some testing on these and on some of the Jadam ferments and processes, he found the nutrients didn't line up with what they thought they had, which I thought was interesting. So yeah,
Oh,
it just be willing to experiment.
yeah. Ultimately, with the approach, like for you from a commercial and a consulting aspect, would would really soil testing kind of be the end answer? Is like after you add all of the ferments or all of the nutrients, all the things that you think you need to prepare the soil, you would then kind of test the soil and be like, "Yep, nailed it," or "We need to adjust."
Or
Um,
tissue testing of the plant itself. Yeah,
ah,
I mean, we're working with a facility in Canada right now that was doing a lot of these sorts of things because they were working with a soil food web consultant, and part of that was a lot of teas and ferments. And this particular consultant didn't have a very strong idea of soil testing. So while they were soil testing, they were using the wrong targets and pulling data from the wrong metrics. For example, they were pulling calcium from the maleic 3 when they should have been pulling it from the saturated paste as a target. Just little nuances like that. And so what we did when we came in is we said, okay, stop everything, because you have too many variables. When you're having all of these inputs, you have 50 inputs in a run, it is so hard to know what's doing what. If we can get this
Yeah.
down to a handful, 5 inputs, and we can understand the soil test, then we can start to work to adding things. So it's much easier to add one variable than it is to try and figure out which of the 50 things was happening at once. And so that's sort of our approach, and it's just easier. Otherwise, you're constantly adding new ferments and taking ones out, and you don't know what's doing what, and it's just a guessing game.
Absolutely logical. And I smiled and I kind of chuckled as you're saying it, because in my mind it's just like, keep it simple. I'm like, geez, where have I heard that before?
Yeah, these guys are running sips too in their beds.
Okay.
So and they have large, I think 12 to 18-inch depth, 4x4, 4x8 beds, if I remember correctly. So yes, full circle to your sips question.
And full circle back to the original question concerning water and pH. It depends is always going to be the answer in there. But what is kind of like an acceptable range for tap water? Smoke a lot of Potamus. Fun name to say. Glad I got that one out the first time. Smoke a lot of Potamus. My top pH is 9.0 with ppm of around 2.0. And again, you mentioned that pH is a logarithmic scale. So like the difference between the 6.0 and 7.0 may be 10, but the difference between 6.0 and 8.0 is 100. So the difference between 6.0 and 9.0 is like 1,000 times off of what the target would be if it's 6.0. Did I understand the logarithmic scale there?
I
Or am I
think
making
so.
up
So
math?
from 6.0 to 6.1 is 10.
Oh, geez.
So it's every one is 10. So that's how it's large. So then 6.0 to 7.0 is 100, I believe,
Yeah. Yeah.
as I
Yeah.
understand it. It's like the Richter scale with earthquakes.
Yes.
Again, I'm doing this from memory and I'm doing math on the fly, so don't hesitate to double check that. Um, First of all, this is the proper use of AI, I feel like. Thank you, Smoke a lot of Potamus. Great photo.
Yes.
Um, if you go on our website, you can go, there's a document that Brandon Hudson, who's in the chat here, put together that gives you metrics for water. It's free.
Okay.
It's literally, I think, the very first thing if you click under the Learn tab and go to blog, and that with those levels, it's definitely worth getting tested at the levels that you're talking about, and that'll tell you sort of what it is that's comprising that 9.0, and that ppm, and that matters too. But yeah, absolutely, at those levels, I would want to get a $25, $30 soil water suitability test, irrigation suitability test.
Awesome. Awesome. And again, these tests are available to the public. They're not cost prohibitive in many cases, just to at least get a baseline and then test every so often. You're not going to go as hard as some professional facilities, but yeah, they're not terrible. Let's see here. We're doing a good job of getting through some of these questions, trying to look for one that kind of relates.
Also
JMJ
says
12.
6 to 7 is 10x is what Hydropotamus is saying. So maybe I have it wrong. I'm gonna have to look that up after this.
Brandon, each whole
See,
number
I
with a
don't
factor of
know.
10. So, okay. So, yeah.
He's saying that, but then Hydropotamus is saying 6 to 7 is 10. We have discrepancies.
That's
And I can't look it up on the fly, so someone's gonna have to look it up and confirm because we can't all be
Yeah.
right. Anyway,
Well,
it's a big
when you
number.
yeah, when you said it was a good use of I thought you were talking about getting the answer, and then I did look at hippopotamus, smoke a lot of potamus's
Those
avatar. I'm like,
picture.
oh,
Yeah.
that is good AI. Okay, good use. But yeah, AI is sometimes when you have a quick question, it's a good place to start. This is definitely where trust but verify comes into play. They'll always cite their sources too. It usually has the little chain link icon next to, at the top what Google feeds you. So click the link. If you want to learn more, you can verify. But yeah, little quick questions like these are awesome to toss in there. It's usually, if I have no clue and I can't get a hold of somebody like Tad or other people, that's where I'll turn to for my starting point, and then I'll dig deeper.
I want to add one caveat to that because people have been putting their soil tests into there, and
Ooh,
the
that's not good.
results are like, make me a living soil mix using these ingredients or recipes. And
Yeah.
I've just found those haven't been as accurate as I would want them to be. So just be careful with AI. I totally agree. Like if I could say like, make me an IPM program for thrips in veg from, that kind of a thing. And it'll give you some really good information as a starting point for creating a standard or some SOPs. So I would use it that way, but the formulation side for like, at least for target metrics right now with cannabis is just not quite there yet.
It's not, and I work with this because again I do a lot of writing for some of these larger seed companies in Europe, and a lot of them are really exploring AI. A lot of companies strictly use AI for their writing, but that is one easy way for me to point to where AI will get it wrong, because there's so much, and this I think directly applies to different soil recipes, or that question of make me an organic soil, is there's so much misguided information out there that isn't able to distinguish as misguided, that it just presents it as like, yeah, that's part of my, formulation to give this answer. And it needs to be buttoned down. So for more complex things like that, yeah, maybe a place to start, but definitely don't fully rely on it. And that's just my 2 cents on the more complex stuff. But the question of what's the ideal ppm and pH, easy, great place to start, great place to go if you don't have another alternate or another source. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I'm sorry.
Cool.
JMJ, he had this question here. I wanted to put this up. Have we looked into the result of using different droplet size when foliar feeding or pest and disease control? And do you use a spreader? I'm under the general understanding that the more micronized, the smaller the droplet, the easier for absorption it is. Kind of like you always talk about, lime. Don't buy the big granules because that takes forever to work. Get the smaller stuff.
Mhm.
So does that translate over to the foliar applications?
Yeah, this is actually a pretty complicated question. There's a
James
few
is
different aspects to it. So, one, yes, droplet size plays a huge role. And the smaller the droplet in general, the better the coverage you're going to get. And so you want to make sure that the product that you're applying is being evenly applied over the best surface area of the leaf to get optimal coverage. It depends on what the product is as to whether or not you need to add some sort of surfactant. It's probably not going to hurt to add a surfactant, but again, this is a little more complicated. So the quality of the, let's just say pesticide, since you mentioned pest and disease, the quality of the product itself is a lot of times, a lot of that is this factor is how do they get that product? Like, let's talk about Stuff Oil X, for example. The reason, or let's make it something that people might like a little better, like EpiShield, which is a 25B product. It's derived from herbs, and it's an oil-based product. What makes that product so effective is that they're able to use less of it but get better coverage and efficacy because of the way that the product is created, at a molecular level. And so, yes, the answer is absolutely makes a difference. How that product is applied also, not only in terms of being able to use lower concentrations, but also your sprayer itself makes a huge difference in terms of how that product is being applied to the room and what kind of coverage that you're getting. So, yeah, it's complicated. And so the higher quality product that you buy will probably emulsify better and give you better coverage, and you'll be able to use less of it and get better efficacy. But also the sprayer and the way you apply it will determine, is usually affected by the price too. So a higher quality sprayer is going to give you a smaller droplet size, or a mist that's going to give you better coverage and better efficacy. Because what we don't want with a lot of these products, oils, soaps are a bit of an exception, but when we talk about products that have a mode of action that's killing, like a chemical, for example, if we don't apply it at a high enough concentration, or we don't get good coverage, those pests can develop resistance to them. That's one of the issues with pyrethrins these days, is that in a lot of crops, pests have developed resistances because if they get sprayed and they don't get killed because they don't get enough of that chemical, then they're going to survive and become like super bugs that can fight it off the next time around. And then that's why we have to use multiple modes. That's why they say don't spray the same thing over and over again, but you have to mix up what you're spraying, or use beneficial insects because they can't develop that resistance to it.
And that's a good argument for, sometimes when we joke, is it ready to harvest? It's ready to harvest. Okay, wait another week. When you maybe think you're done spraying and the leaves are covered, spray it a little bit more, because you don't want to leave incomplete areas, or just not apply enough. So another kind of foliar question. Shout out to Chunky Nugs. Thanks for watching today. And he had a good question the other day on my show too. He was asking about top amendments, and he was going to scrog the plants in. Once they're in the tent, they're in the tent once they're scrogged. And he wasn't going to hand water. He was another person doing the bottom watering. He wasn't going to hand water from the top for another week or two. And asked if it was okay to put the dry amendments in so he can easily, with the wand, water it in later, because he can't physically fit back there. I said, make sure you scratch it in so the fan doesn't blow it away, but should be good to go.
Yeah, if you're top dressing nutrients too, you want to get some moisture in there on those dry amendments, because they need moisture in order for microbes to be able to access them efficiently and break them down. Otherwise, they're just going to sit up there and not really become plant available at any reasonable scale of time.
Perfect. Yep. And he was going to go back in with the watering wand and then hit him when it was time. So yes, excellent. But he is adding to the question count here, and it was about foliars. He said, I've heard others talking about using foliar feeding to mimic when it's raining. Is there a benefit of foliar watering if he's not using a foliar to add nutrients or silica, just basically mimicking nature? I'm sure there's a benefit to, potentially strengthening the leaves or strengthening the stems in that regard. But is there another potential benefit or something significant?
Man, what I think about an indoor environment is probably a little bit of risk associated with doing a foliar application, because it's going to create micro pockets of humidity and raise your humidity dramatically.
Okay.
In flower, I would probably definitely, and later in flower, but I would probably avoid that.
In
In
flower,
terms of
definitely.
mimicking nature, that's a different philosophical question that we could kind of get into, where I tend to be a little more controversial on this one, in that I don't really subscribe to biomimicry,
Right.
because what we're doing is really controlled environment agriculture, where we have the ability to control every aspect of that plant's health and growth and what that plant experiences. And so we're not creating, flood events or rain
Mm-hmm.
events, or introducing pests, and we don't have the biodiversity that we have outdoors. We don't have natural predators. Um, we don't have crop diversity. So it's just a different scenario. And interestingly enough, people that do this, one of my arguments against it would be that we actually see higher the papers I've seen on microbes in relation to agricultural soils is well managed agricultural soils, like organics were higher than conventional, but they had more biodiversity and microbial biomass than um, field lands or undisturbed soils or places where we weren't
Wow.
intentionally cultivating crops. So that's one place where I think biomimicry breaks down a little bit. I mean, we don't have animals walking by and shitting on our plants. Like all of these things just happen in nature and we can't recreate them all. And I think in nature, plants don't grow as well as they can in an environment where we do control for these things. So I don't look at it necessarily as like, what does Mother Nature do? I look at it as like, what's best for my plants? And then if Mother Nature does it, then that's like a bonus on top. Um, kind of a cherry on top. So it's a nuanced question that definitely deserves a lot more time than we're going to give it. But I just encourage people to kind of think of it from both sides.
I agree. Again, what you're kind of saying with just biomimicry, there is a reason we're doing this inside. It is for control. It is for consistency. Some things we just can't duplicate, nor do we want to duplicate them. But Chonky, thank you for the question, brother. Always good to see you there. And
Great question.
Hydropotamus kind of had one that maybe dovetailed on this a little bit because this is different. This is being outside. He says, why do my fabric potted plants love being outside in the rain? Is there more nitrogen or oxygen being pushed into the soil? Is there a benefit to that? Again, don't do it in flower, as you were saying. Absolutely not. It'd be something strictly I would maybe think of for the veg. I don't personally like bringing things out and then in to my garden. That's for me kind of just an IPM risk. It's like once it goes out, it's out. But I also know a lot of breeders and experienced growers who will put their plants out in the sun for maybe a month in the spring to recharge, as they say, reinvigorate it. So is there magic to it, or are we just going to blame it on the full moon cycle?
I mean, there's definitely a difference in sunlight versus what we get spectrally from indoor lights. We've gotten better at it, but it is different. I mean, this is confusing because I don't know why the fabric pots would make a difference other than maybe you are underwatering and then when the rain or watering unequally into the pot. And so maybe the pots are getting more saturated because they're getting watered slower outdoors and reaching field capacity versus if you're watering too quickly, that water may just be running through the pot versus fully saturating the soil. In a thunderstorm, I think there's more atmospheric nitrogen, I believe, but
Right.
This is testing my Discovery Channel
Well,
documentary knowledge.
Hillbilly
Yeah,
Herb's chiming in here. He says nitrogen particles in rainwater if there's been lightning. So
I wonder how much that actually contributes in terms of amount of actual nitrogen, noticeable nitrogen into the soil. I have to think it's probably pretty nominal, unless the water
right.
quality that you're watering with is significantly different than the rainwater that you're in your area. That could be an impact too.
Says I
I
overwater
overwater.
filter, so fabric is easy for me to dry. Not during flower. Okay. I mean, again, one of the some of these things, much like soil biology, much like cannabinoids and terpenes and thiols and esters and cannabis, we don't know the full picture yet. And some things we may be like, yeah, I feel that this gives me an improvement. You can repeat it and conclude that it does give me an improvement, but sometimes we don't necessarily know why. And in those cases, if I don't, at least for me personally, if I don't see an immediate danger, I'm like, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But in a case like that, my concern again is bringing it in and out of the garden, just a pest thing there. Um, but yeah,
You
so if we
you
don't have
you
an
could
answer.
collect your rainwater and just water with the rainwater versus moving your plants outside, and that would eliminate
Okay.
some variability and tell you if it's the water quality versus the, process of moving it outside.
I would. There you go. Good solution. And
I don't
that's why
know.
Richard Painter in here says, hey, big shout out to Ted. He's been watching you for a few minutes and you know what you're talking about. So
Oh,
with,
thanks,
with
Rich. I
that
do my
extra
best.
recommendation.
There's a ton I don't know. I will, but I'm gonna do my best here, so thank you. That was very kind.
Let's see here. Here's just kind of a general grow question, but shout out Grow a Kenny, another person testing some genetics for me right now. He says, I have noticed a couple plants having leaf curl, but still be praying, and the others look great. Could this be a VPD issue or a root issue? It could be both. It could also be a pest issue. I would get in there and scout. Again, if the leaf color, if that's telling you anything different, VPD, you would probably see that in the other plants and the other leaves too. You will get a little bit of a curl. Sometimes it's just like the tips, they'll kind of fold up. The worse it gets, it can kind of canoe. Um, but yeah, root issue, like if the pH is off, that can kind of cause a little bit of tacoing as well. Am I missing anything there? Or do you have ideas, Tad?
I always it's so hard to know without seeing them too, because everyone has a different idea of what praying leaves are and what curling leaves are, and what a healthy plant is and an unhealthy plant. Because I've had people reach out that are like, "My plants look like shit, and I can't, I don't know what to
They're
do, and they're
doing
freaking
this.
out." Well, and I'll see them, and I'll be like, "Man, your plants look better than 95% of other plants I see." And then I'll have other people that are so proud of their plants, and I'm like, "Oh, man, I would have killed these things off." So it's always good to get a little more information. But one thing, the first thing I like to look at when I'm thinking about a plant is, um, look around the room. If it's only happening to one area or one plant, then you could look at maybe your genetics are a little more diverse and they don't like the environment that they're in. Or I have a hot spot where there may be a pest issue, or maybe I'm watering differently there. Um, so if it's that's a really good clue, is if it's happening to your whole room, um, it's probably your environment. If it's happening to one plant in your room, it's either localized environment, like maybe you have a fan blowing on that plant, so it's transpiring much faster, and so it needs a lot more watering, and you're not watering it enough relative to the rest of your room. That's entirely possible. So um, you got to be a detective and really just think through the process, take a step back, and then try and figure out what's going on. So yeah, I would hate to misdiagnose just off of that question myself
Well,
of
that
what it could be.
I think you present a great way of looking at it. It's the same way we look at nutrient deficiencies in the plant. We start with where is it? Is it at the top of the plant? Is it at the bottom of the plant? Just with this room, is it the entire room? Is it a section of the room? So we're really kind of trying to isolate. It's troubleshooting chain. If you don't know where it is, start in the middle and then go either way. And as you were talking, another thing came to mind too: is that fan or are those leaves the ones closest to your fan? Because
Mhm.
sometimes that can do it too, is just getting a little bit of wind burn because that's the branch or that's the side that's in front of the fan that hits the rest of your tent. So yeah, a lot of things to consider there. Um, Go ahead, guys. If you have some questions, keep tossing them in. I do, because I see we're already around 45 minutes. I wanted to ask you, Tad, about this event in Bozeman. So it's a soil science
Yeah.
conference, but can you maybe kind of give me an overview? And then I want to ask just a couple more questions from a home grower perspective. So what are we looking at there? When is it?
Yeah.
And that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so I started the podcast. I think we're on our 6th year now. It's called Cannabis Cultivation and Science. I know a lot of people in the chat have heard of it. And I got the opportunity to really interview some cool people. And over the years, I've gotten to pick my sort of favorite people for aspects of cultivation, like Dr. Nadia Saba is the expert when it comes to airflow and environmental control and VPD and all of these things. Really, in North America, as far as I know, I haven't. She's the one that everyone refers to when they when they give talks at conferences. They're the ones. He's the one I see people referencing, which is really cool. Um, so she's going to be there. Suzanne Wainwright Evans is the bug lady. She's the best entomologist. She works with Disney and Vegas hotels and all that stuff in the ornamental horticulture world and in cannabis. And then I just recently I got off the phone right before this with Jeremy Plum. And he's been on the podcast and he's going
Awesome.
to talk about the sensory experience of cannabis. And he was telling me how he was getting into like our olfactory centers in our brain on this phone call and how they relate to our experience with cannabis. And then I asked him like, hey, could you tie that all into how we cultivate? Like, can you explain how we can cultivate for these sensory experiences? And he said, absolutely. So I'm really excited to add him to the lineup. So it's a Dram, who I mentioned, is going to be sending someone out. I've talked to Bioworks. So the idea here is to get all of my favorite people to Bozeman, Montana at Collective Elevation, which is a phenomenal facility there in Bozeman. It's going to be September 5th through the 7th. Tickets are $200, and then there's a workshop for $75. It's a 2-hour workshop in the morning before the conference starts. And then the third day, so the first 2 days are the conference, and they're on site. There's going to be places just outside the fence if people want to smoke. You won't be able to smoke in the talk itself, but just outside the fence, you can go out there and smoke. And then the third day is going to be a tasting event. So Living Soil Alliance Montana is going to provide the weed. You're going to show up and they're going to have all these different places and you can try all their different weed that they're growing. It's all going to be grown in living soil. It's going to be just a lot of fun. There's going to be music and you get to have that sensory experience, I guess. So that's what it is. We're still nailing down some of the details, but we wanted to get the information out really early to people and would love to see people there. It's the first time we've done this. Hopefully it can become a more common thing. It's a ton of work to put this all together, but I'm super excited. Yeah.
Dude, that's cool. I'm glad that you're doing that. I hope maybe I'll find a way to be in attendance myself. I'll
You
actually
got to
start
come.
looking at the calendar. That would be fun. I actually need to check my calendar and I'm like, yeah, let's see if I can make that swing. I know my wife's going to be gone in August. I'll check the dates. That is awesome. So is it open to the public? Like, can anybody who wants to come? Anybody can buy a ticket?
Yeah, you don't have to be a commercial cultivator to get a ticket.
Okay.
You don't have to be from Montana. I think the first ticket when we opened up sales was actually someone in Louisiana, maybe.
Awesome.
So yeah, really from anywhere. It should be a lot of fun, and it's really what the ticket does. It gives you access to be able to ask questions to people much smarter than me that are going to be there. Sorry, that's my alarm. It's warning me I have 10 minutes before I have to leave to go pick up my kiddo. Yeah, so that's the idea of it. And the reason we're doing it at Collective is because not only are these guys super cool and have a phenomenal facility, you can go on YouTube here and check out the tour that I did of their facility so you can actually see what the place looks like. But yeah, they're opening up their place. They're not charging us for a location. So this might be something we could do other places in the future. But yeah, we're just excited to get off the ground in Montana. They have a lot of really cool growers out there. I got to say, I was quite impressed when I've been out there the last 2 years now.
They do. They have a lot of space, and one of the people that I really enjoy as far as like breeder, Skunk VA. He has Lucky Dog Seed Co. He's out in Montana as well. I almost want to say Bozeman too. So that's a
Nice.
person that I would love to maybe try to stop by and talk to and see and check out the facilities if I'm so blessed. He's one of the well accepted caretakers of the chem lines. And the Chem
Oh,
91 is
very
one of my
cool.
all-time favorites. So he's people don't doubt he's got that stuff. So yeah, it's cool. So that would be a good time.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes.
these guys are in climate controlled greenhouses. If you can grow in Montana weather year round, you got to know a thing or two, right? Um, it's pretty impressive the health of their plants in the variety of climate difference between winter and summer that you get there. So yeah,
Good. All right. So I will cross that one off the list. Gosh, this is a great question, Troy. We are talking almost well, we are talking multiple times a week. Closer. Very, very, very things are like this far, man. When will the soil mix you guys came up with be available? This close. Send me a DM. Let me know where you live. I'd be curious. People who are interested in picking up the soil mix, send me a message on Instagram or shoot me an email to the support at chadwestport.com. Let me know where you guys live. It'll be good to know, and that can maybe help us get things out quicker. Yeah,
yeah.
that's where I want to go with. Oh, go ahead, Tad.
Oh, I just want to say, first of all, Troy, that is an impressive fish, man. I've never caught or seen anything like that in person. Kudos to
No,
you.
me neither.
um,
Good point.
One thing that Chad and I have been talking about is just the fact that soil is heavy and shipping it across the country is really challenging because we were putting in different UPS addresses to kind of see what it would look like. And that's something we're kind of sorting through right now is like, we want to, Chad wants to keep this as affordable as possible. And a lot of the cost is the shipping. So that's what we're sorting through at the moment. It's not that the soil isn't available. It's just that, how do we make this, how do we figure out a way to provide this to people affordably with what shipping costs are these days? So
Yeah. Yeah. That's the battle. And I see a comment in here, Traptor X. I'll just put it up anyways. It's not a popcorn moment. He says, Chad, what are your thoughts on the FCP episode where Mr. Soul said, if the seeds don't sink in the water, then they're no good? I think we all know the question to this. And I think we all know that Mr. Soul is a very smart and intelligent person and a great breeder as well. But we know if they sink, it doesn't mean they're bad. I mean, I've had dozens of seeds that were still floating, grow a taproot, and I put it into water. And I will bet, let's see, 240 of you are watching. I pretty much bet at least 50 of you have had the same experience. So smart guy, just misspoke. Maybe he's never had that experience, but yeah, not a big thing. I'm right. No.
yeah,
Okay.
this Sweet Sydney 99 it was a cool plant back in the day, and props to him for creating that. So
Yeah.
it is
I
what it
will get that
is.
out.
I wanted to touch back on the soil thing though, really quick. So one of
Yeah.
the things that we're talking about is that with this style of growing with living soil, your upfront cost is a little bit higher, but your overall cost should be lower. And then how do you reuse that soil so you're not having to rebuy the media? And that's where you really see the savings. So
Yeah.
it's also not only is the freight higher, but you need to sort of change your mental approach to this and say, okay, well, if I'm doing like what you did in your grow, um, your initial cost to get the soil is going to be a little bit higher, but you're not using any bottled nutrients. You're just watering your plant, and so those things, not having to have a whole feeding chart of products,
Yeah, dude.
it cross cancels to a certain extent. In fact, saves you money and time in terms of having to mix and apply all those things. So I just want to have a quick conversation around that because I think sometimes that gets overlooked when people see the sticker shock of living soils.
Yeah.
And next
It's,
run,
it's
in theory, we could re-amend that soil, and now we're pennies on the dollar because, um, especially if we're not soil testing. I mean, I'd love to soil test, but as a home grower, it's not always practical to spend the money on soil testing. I think we could have a nutrient pack that you mix into that soil and are off and running next run and should be able to. We should be able to get. I feel pretty confident saying we should be able to get 2 to 3 cycles out of a soil mix before we get out of whack to the point where soil testing or starting over would be a thing. And if you are soil testing and you're a commercial grower, you're on scale, we can do this for 8 years in a bed without any issues. But that does require every cycle we're soil testing the whole room with one soil test. So just different
Wow.
approaches, just something to consider.
Yeah. I just want to shout out to Bingus. Thank you for helping with questions in chat. I see a lot of people helping out in chat there. That is awesome. That is a great community here that we are building, or that we are a part of. I should say that we are a part of. But yeah, with the soil, gosh, the final video for the no joke in the custom soil will be out in about 2 weeks. I'm just looking at the calendar there. It'll be out in about 2 weeks. I think you guys are going to be impressed with the results. I certainly am. And it was a water only soil, guys. Like, that is, as Tad, as you're saying, is like it cuts down on costs over time. Absolutely. But just even immediately, like, I have another tent right now with a whole bunch of things in 1 gallon pots that you have to feed a different way. I hate when I have to water that tent because I have to measure everything out. I have to measure X amount of things out. I love my life when I have the most beautiful tent behind me and I've just been adding water. So that's a huge benefit. But I want to ask you, Tad, because, I have, let's just say I have what, 11 gallons worth of the soil. What mass do I need to get before, is it like 20 gallons of soil before it really makes sense for me to be able to amend accurately and then reuse it? I don't imagine just like buy one bag and then continually do it would be as efficient as a larger mass. So is there a certain, like, I need 4 bags before I should really start amending, or do you need 10 bags? How does that work?
Yeah, I don't know if there's an exact answer to this because the soil test with an analysis is going to cost you, let's just say $100 just to make it an even number. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to buy the amendments. Now the amendments are going to cost significantly less because you can dial that in and you're not going to need a lot. I would say maybe a yard of soil, half a yard of soil, if I were to make up a number,
Okay.
which would be,
Okay.
what is that? 12 to 15 to 27 cubic feet,
Okay.
just as a general rule. But yeah, so for a home grower, I would say if you start to see an issue, then you could consider soil testing, or you could use a dichotomous key like we have on our website that Brandon put together to kind of try to diagnose what it is and then apply a little bit of whatever it is. But you should be able to get, well, that first run, you shouldn't need to worry about it because
No.
that's what you're paying for, is that we've already formulated it to do what what your plants did.
Yeah.
And then the next run, I would just mix in the nutrients based on what we think was taken out. Because here's the thing, like you are growing, let's just say you're growing under LED lights, ambient CO2, uh, so no extra CO2, and at this VPD, temperature and humidity. Someone else might be growing outdoors. Someone else might be growing under HPS, 1200 ppfd, 2000 ppm of
Right.
CO2, and be pulling a lot more nutrients out of there. So everyone's soil is
Fair.
going to be a little bit different. So this is just our shotgun approach without soil testing to get you close. Um, there was a question on here I wanted to end with if we have time, because I thought it was such
Yeah.
a great question from
Absolutely.
where did it go? Oh, it's way up here now.
Okay. I'm looking for it. Does it have question in the front of it, or?
Fresh baked at 2:56 p.m. So
Ah,
for all the organic growers, oh, you were good. I think this is a great question. I'd love to answer it if we have time.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. A fresh baked shout out to you. So for all the organic growers in here, do you have a bottle around for emergency? Yes, I do. If so, what bottle? He used to do nectar, so I have most of the line collecting dust, but if needed. Yeah, always good to have backups. Go ahead, take this one, Tad.
Thank you. Yeah, so My go-to organic Band-Aid bottled nutrient would be from Pacific Grow. It's called CFOS. It just because it has a little bit more phosphoric acid in it, so it's a little higher level of phosphorus. But any fish hydrolysate will get you a little closer. That's sort of a good go-to bottled nutrient that's organic, approved for use in organic production. It's not fully organic because they're allowed to use phosphoric acid to stabilize the fish. But because of that, you get very good available pee out of it. And it's nice. Now, here's where I'm going to get a little bit controversial because um, nectar is not organic. Yeah, and we do sell it. A lot of places do. It's not just from us, but that's the product. Yes.
Okay.
Here's where people might struggle with this a little bit, but I'm going to say it anyway, especially if you already have bottled nutrients that are from growing conventionally, synthetic nutrients like nectar. You can absolutely use those in low doses and it will feed your plants. It will actually feed the microbiology in your soil and it will have potential benefits for you. Now, it's not going to destroy your soil unless you apply it at very, very high concentrations. Low doses of conventional mineral salts actually feed microbes, and there's research to support that. There's reasons we don't, as an organic grower, I don't like to use synthetic nutrients. One, I don't like to support that industry. It caused a lot of issues with the, conventional agriculture. A lot of the nutrients are coming out of China. There's a huge fossil fuel cost, not only with their production, but also with shipping them and getting them places. But if I want to be honest with myself as an organic grower, from a plant perspective, it does not really care if those nitrates come from fish meal or blood meal or nectar of the gods, ammonium nitrate. So yeah, so that's just what you want to think about when you're, at least from my perspective, when you're thinking about these things.
Awesome. Thanks for sliding that one in there here at the end. Chat, you guys have been great as you always are. If we didn't get to your question, or if you still have questions after you're watching this or replaying it, please leave them in the comments, either here on the Chad Westport YouTube channel or on the KIS Organics YouTube channel. You can find out more about the event in Bozeman. Just go to kisorganics.com, as well as some of the articles that Tad had mentioned here concerning water that Brandon has put together. And if you want to check out any of my gear, chadwestport.com would be the place to go. I think that does it for this week. Tad, any closing comments?
No, your hat's awesome. I just have to add that too. Yeah,
Dope.
it's very
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Sure.
This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you hosting.
Yeah, you guys have a great day, and we will see you next month, but every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on the KIS Organics YouTube channel. Catch Tad and Brandon, and party on, everybody. See ya.
Bye, guys.